expensive bank lobby in Manhattan. His shoes were held together with tape. His hands were shaking. And every person in that room had already decided he didn't belong. All he wanted was to check his balance. The millionaire banker behind the desk laughed loud enough for everyone to hear, but seconds later, when the screen lit up, that laughter died, because the number staring back at him wasn't just shocking. It was impossible, and in that moment, the power in the room shifted forever. Before we continue, if you enjoy powerful stories about injustice, quiet, courage, and moments that change lives forever, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. Now, let's go back to the moment it all began. The revolving doors were heavier than Marcus expected. He had to lean his small weight into the glass to make them move, his palms leaving faint smudges behind as the doors slowly carried him inside. The moment he stepped through, the city vanished. The heat, the noise, the smell of the street, all of it was replaced by cold air and silence so sharp it made his shoulders tense. The lobby stretched out before him like a cathedral built for money. Marble floors shone so brightly he was afraid to step on them, as if he might leave footprints that would never come out. Tall columns rose toward a ceiling trimmed with gold, and crystal chandeliers hung above, glowing softly, like they were watching him. Marcus stopped just inside the entrance, suddenly unsure if he was allowed to go any farther. His sneakers squeaked against the floor, the sound far too loud in a room where conversations were kept low and controlled. He looked down at his shoes too big, held together with strips of duct tape, and felt his chest tighten. He pulled his arms closer to his sides, trying to make himself smaller. Everyone else looked like they belonged. Men in tailored suits moved with easy confidence, their voices calm, their laughter quiet and assured. Women sat on leather chairs that looked too perfect to touch, flipping through magazines Marcus couldn't afford to glance at. No one rushed. No one hesitated. This was a place for people who were certain of their right to be here. Marcus wasn't. He could feel eyes on him almost immediately. Some curious, some annoyed, some sharp with judgment. He kept his gaze forward and clutched the worn envelope in his pocket, pressing his fingers against the edge of the card inside, like it was the only solid thing anchoring him to the ground. The envelope was creased from being folded and unfolded too many times, from nights spent lying awake, wondering if this was a mistake. He took another step, then another, each one echoing through the lobby. The air smelled different here, polished wood, fresh flowers, something clean and expensive he didn't have a name for. It made him think of places he'd only seen through windows, worlds he was never meant to enter. For a moment, he considered turning around, slipping back through the revolving doors, going back to the street, where at least no one pretended he didn't exist. But then he thought of the eviction notice taped crookedly to his apartment door. He thought of his sister asking if there would be dinner that night. He thought of the envelope that had arrived 6 months ago, with his name typed neatly on the front, like someone believed he mattered. Marcus straightened his back. He wasn't here to belong. He wasn't here to be seen. He was here because he had no other choice. And as he took one more step into the heart of a world that was never meant for him, he had no idea that every eye in the room was about to turn and that this place, so certain of its rules, was about to be quietly, irrevocably changed. Marcus had barely taken 3 steps before the silence shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. It was the kind of change you felt in your skin, like a room deciding something about you before you ever opened your mouth. Conversations softened. Laughter thinned out. Heads turned, then quickly looked away, as if acknowledging him too openly would be impolite or contagious. He approached the reception desk, its surface smooth and white, without a single scratch. A woman stood behind it, perfectly still, her posture sharp, her hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. When she looked down at him, her expression flickered with something between confusion and irritation, like a fly had landed where it didn't belong. "May I help you?" she asked. Her voice was polite, but empty. Marcus swallowed. The words he'd practiced all morning suddenly felt too big for his mouth. I just want to check my balance." The woman's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Just enough. I'm sorry," she said, her eyes already scanning past him. "But this is a private banking institution. I have an account," Marcus said quickly, the desperation slipping into his voice before he could stop it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the envelope with shaking hands, sliding the black card onto the desk. She stared at it, really stared. For a moment, the mask slipped. Confusion crept in, then doubt, then something harder. Please wait, she said, gesturing vaguely toward a seating area without meeting his eyes, before Marcus could move. A laugh cut through the room. It was sharp and confident, the kind that didn't ask permission to be heard. Janet, a man's voice called out, smooth and amused. Is there a reason we're letting street kids wander into the lobby? The sound of his shoes echoed as he approached, slow and deliberate. Marcus didn't need to look up to know who it was. Everyone else already had. Richard Blackwell stopped a few feet away, hands resting casually at his sides, his suit flawless, his smile easy. He looked Marcus over from head to toe, taking his time, like he was inspecting something cheap. Look at him, Richard continued, loud enough for the room. Dirt on his face, clothes falling apart. And he wants to check his balance? A ripple of laughter moved through the lobby. Not everyone joined in, but no one stopped it. Marcus felt heat rush to his face. His ears rang. He wanted to disappear. You know, Richard said lightly, there's a branch downtown that handles smaller accounts. Much more appropriate. I have a card, Marcus said again, louder now, his voice trembling but stubborn. He stepped forward, his sneakers squeaking against the marble, every sound magnified. Richard's smile widened. This should be entertaining. He leaned back slightly, folding his arms. Come on then. Let's see what kind of balance a kid like you thinks he has. All around them, people watched. Some with amusement, some with curiosity, some with discomfort they refused to name. Marcus stood there, small and shaking, every instinct telling him to run. But he didn't, because running wouldn't feed his sister. Running wouldn't honor his mother. And running wouldn't change the fact that, for better or worse, the world had already decided who he was. So he stayed where he was, under the weight of 100 eyes. As the laughter faded into a tense, waiting silence, one that had no idea it was about to be turned upside down, Marcus felt the room closing in on him. The laughter had faded, but the judgment remained, thick and heavy, pressing against his chest. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to turn around, to push back through the revolving doors and disappear into the noise of the street, where no one would stare at him like this. His legs felt weak, his hands cold, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. This was a mistake. He knew it was. He had known it the moment he stepped inside. The moment the cold air hit his skin and the marble floor reflected his taped shoes back at him. He didn't belong here. People like him didn't walk into places like this and come out whole. Richard Blackwell's eyes stayed on him, sharp and amused, waiting for the flinch, waiting for the retreat. Waiting for the small, dirty kid to do what small, dirty kids were supposed to do when powerful men laughed at them. Run. Marcus shifted his weight, his foot sliding back just an inch. His throat tightened, and for a split second, he almost did it. Almost turned around. Almost gave the room exactly what it expected. Then his mind betrayed him. He saw the corner store again, Mrs. Chen's tired smile, the way her hands shook as she handed him back the empty bag. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I can't do it anymore. He saw the eviction notice, the red letters screaming louder than any laugh in this room. He saw his sister sitting on the edge of the mattress. They shared, swinging her legs and asking if dinner was coming soon. And then he saw his mother, not as she was at the end, thin and exhausted, but the way she used to look when she smiled at him after a long shift. The way she used to say, "Be brave, Marcus. Even when your voice shakes." His hands curled into fists at his sides. He didn't look at the people watching him anymore. He didn't look at the banker or the receptionist or the clients whispering behind polished hands. He focused on the desk in front of him, on the quiet hum of the computers, on the simple truth that had brought him here. I'm not here to cause trouble, Marcus said. His voice was soft, too soft to command attention. But it didn't break. I just want to check my balance. The words hung in the air. Richard's smile twitched, just slightly. Annoyance flickered beneath the amusement, like something wasn't going according to plan. You're a stubborn little thing, he said. I'll give you that. Marcus didn't respond. He didn't argue. He didn't apologize. He stayed where he was, and in that moment, standing alone in the center of a room, built to make people like him feel small, Marcus did something far braver than shouting or fighting or proving anyone wrong. He refused to disappear. The room waited, holding its breath, unaware that the quiet courage of a 12-year-old boy had already shifted something invisible, and that the laughter that once filled the air would never sound the same again. Richard Blackwell leaned back in his chair as if he had all the time in the world. The boy's refusal to run hadn't settled him more than he cared to admit. That wasn't how this was supposed to go. Children like Marcus were meant to shrink, to crumble under a single sharp word, not stand there quietly, as if they had every right to exist in the center of his marble kingdom. A slow smile spread across Richard's face, calculated and cold. "Well," he said loudly, glancing around the lobby to be sure every eye was still watching. "Since you insist on wasting everyone's time, let's put this little fantasy to rest." He turned his monitor slightly so the nearby clients could see his hands move across the keyboard. The clicking echoed in the open space, each tap deliberate, almost theatrical. Richard knew an audience when he had one, and he intended to enjoy this. Marcus stepped closer, the envelope trembling in his grip. The desk seemed impossibly high from where he stood, a barrier between him and a man who looked down at him like an inconvenience. He could feel his pulse in his ears, but he kept his eyes forward. "You understand," Richard continued, his voice smooth, "that if this card is stolen, you're committing a serious crime. Federal crime, actually. People go to prison for things like this." A murmur rippled through the room. Marcus swallowed. "I didn't steal it." "Of course you didn't," Richard said, not bothering to hide the sarcasm. "And I suppose the account just magically appeared in your name?" "My mom sent it," Marcus replied. "Before she died." For a moment, Richard paused. Just a fraction of a second. Then he waved the words away like an inconvenience. "Tragic," he said flatly, "but unlikely." He typed the name into the system, narrating as he went. "Marcus Chen," he read aloud. "Let's see what secrets you're hiding." The lobby had gone quiet now. Even the whispers had stopped. People leaned subtly closer, drawn in by the promise of public humiliation. This was better than any morning meeting, better than scrolling headlines over coffee. Marcus watched Richard's face, trying to read it, trying to prepare himself for what was coming. He expected laughter. He expected anger. He expected the guards to be called. What he didn't expect was silence. The typing stopped. Richard stared at the screen. His confident smile, still in place, but frozen like it had been glued there by force of habit rather than feeling. His eyes moved slightly, scanning rereading, as if the numbers might rearrange themselves if he waited long enough. "Well?" someone whispered. Richard cleared his throat. "There seems to be a delay," he said, his voice tighter now. "These systems aren't always reliable." He refreshed the page. Marcus's stomach twisted. The room felt warmer somehow, the air heavier. He thought about all the ways this could end, with security dragging him out, with police lights, with another door slammed shut in his face. Richard leaned forward, closer to the screen. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, uncertain for the first time. "That's not possible," he muttered, too quiet for the room, but loud enough for Marcus to hear. "What?" Marcus asked. Richard straightened quickly, his smile snapping back into place, though it no longer reached his eyes. "Nothing," he said. "Just, let's verify this properly." He glanced toward the receptionist. "Janet, come here." As she approached, heels clicking sharply against the marble, Marcus felt it, something shifting beneath the polished surface of the room. The banker had meant to expose him. Instead, the screen had exposed something else entirely, and the truth, whatever it was, had just begun to surface. Janet stopped beside the desk, her professional smile already in place, ready to support whatever performance her boss intended next. She glanced at the screen casually at first, expecting to see an empty account or an error message that would justify escorting the boy out. Then her breath caught, her fingers froze above the keyboard. The color drained from her face so quickly it was as if someone had turned off a light behind her eyes. Richard noticed. "What is it?" he asked, irritation creeping into his voice. "Read it." Janet swallowed. "Sir, the account is active." A few people in the lobby leaned closer. "Of course it's active," Richard snapped. "That doesn't mean it has anything in it. Read the balance." Janet's lips parted, then pressed together again. She checked the screen once more, as if hoping she had misread it. She hadn't. "The balance," she said quietly, "is $47,300,000. The words landed without sound, yet they seemed to shake the room. Someone laughed once, then stopped when no one else joined in. A man near the windows frowned, certain he'd heard wrong. The woman with the pearl necklace stiffened, her smile sliding away. Richard stared at Janet. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking." Sir? He pushed back from his chair and leaned forward, shoving her aside just enough to see the screen himself. His eyes locked onto the numbers. He blinked, refreshed the page. The number remained. For the first time since Marcus had entered the bank, Richard Blackwell felt the ground shift beneath him. That's impossible, he whispered. Marcus stood very still. He didn't understand the number, not really. He only understood the way the room had changed. The way the banker's voice had lost its sharp edge. The way everyone was suddenly looking at him, as if he were something fragile and dangerous. Richard straightened abruptly, smoothing his jacket as if composure could be ironed back into place. There must be a system error, he said louder now, for the benefit of the room. An input mistake. Accounts like this don't just appear. Janet shook her head. The funds were deposited 6 months ago. It's clean, verified, no flags. 6 months ago, Marcus's fingers curled around the envelope. That was when the card had arrived. That was when his mother had still been alive. Richard's jaw tightened. He looked at Marcus again, truly looked this time. Not at the dirt or the shoes or the frayed clothes, but at the boy inside them. The child who should not exist in his world. The child whose name now sat beside a number that dwarfed most of his clients' portfolios. How did your family come into this money? Richard asked, his tone careful, brittle. My mom, Marcus said. She worked a lot. A few heads turned away. Others stared harder. Richard felt heat creeping up his neck. He could sense the shift in the room, the unspoken recalculation happening in every mind present. Moments ago, this had been entertainment. Now it was something else. A mistake. A spectacle turned inward. He forced a thin smile. Well, he said, voice strained, it appears you do have an account. Marcus nodded slowly. The number glowed on the screen between them, bright and undeniable, and with it, the certainty that nothing in this room would ever be the same again. The silence didn't break all at once. It fractured. A murmur rippled through the lobby, low at first, then growing as people leaned toward one another, whispering behind hands that had moments ago been used to laugh. Shoes shifted on marble. A phone buzzed. Someone coughed too loudly, desperate to fill the space that had suddenly become unbearable. Richard felt it slipping. He straightened, raising his chin the way he always did when a room needed reminding who ruled it. Everyone, he said sharply, clapping his hands once. The sound echoed, but didn't command the obedience he expected. This is a private matter. I suggest you return to your business. No one moved. A few clients glanced at Marcus again. Not with disgust now, but with something closer to uncertainty, calculation, the kind of look Richard was used to seeing when people evaluated him. That realization made his stomach tighten. This account will be frozen immediately, Richard said, louder now. Until we complete a full investigation. Janet flinched. Sir, we can't do that without cause. I am the cause, he snapped. This bank answers to me. A calm voice cut through the tension. Actually, it doesn't. Heads turned. James Morrison had stepped forward from the far side of the lobby, his expression unreadable, his movements unhurried. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. James, Richard said, forcing a laugh that landed flat. This doesn't concern you. It does when you start making illegal threats in public, James replied. And when you humiliate a client. A few people nodded without realizing it. Richard felt heat crawl up his neck. This boy is clearly part of something irregular. James glanced at the screen, then at Marcus. His eyes softened. The account is legitimate. I've reviewed the documentation. You reviewed it? Richard snapped. Without my approval? I didn't need it. The words hit harder than any insult. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, he noticed how many eyes were no longer on Marcus, but on him, watching, judging. One of the guards shifted uncertainly near the entrance. Unsure whose authority to follow, Richard lowered his voice. James, you're overstepping. No, James said. You did. When you mocked a child. When you turned this lobby into a spectacle. When you forgot that power isn't proven by cruelty. Marcus stood frozen between them, heart pounding. He had never seen adults speak to one another like this. Never seen someone challenge authority without fear. James turned to him. Marcus, would you come with me, please? Richard took a step forward. He stays. The room held its breath. James didn't raise his voice. Richard, sit down. It wasn't a command. It was a verdict. Something inside Richard finally cracked. He saw it, then saw that the room had chosen. That his laughter, his confidence, his sharp words had cost him something he couldn't immediately reclaim. Slowly, stiffly, he sat. James placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You're safe," he said quietly, as they walked toward the elevator. The whispers followed them, not mocking now, but stunned. Behind them, Richard Blackwell remained at his desk, surrounded by wealth and silence, and for the first time in his career, neither obeyed him. The conference room felt like a different world. The noise, the stares, the sharp edges of the lobby all faded behind thick glass and soft lighting. Here, the chairs were cushioned, the air warmer, the silence gentler. Marcus sat stiffly at the long table, his hands folded in his lap, as if afraid that touching anything might break the spell. James returned with 2 glasses of water and slid one toward him. "Take your time," he said, sitting across from him. "No one is rushing you now." Marcus nodded, though his chest still felt tight. Am I in trouble?" James shook his head. "No, you did nothing wrong. You came here because you needed help. That takes courage." Marcus stared at the glass, watching his reflection wobble in the surface. "I don't understand," he whispered. "My mom didn't have money. We were always behind. Sometimes we didn't eat." James's expression softened. He reached into his folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper, worn at the edges. "Your mother understood more than she ever let on," he said quietly. "She was planning long before anyone noticed." He turned the paper so Marcus could see it. A letter. His mother's handwriting leapt off the page, familiar and painful all at once. "She came here 6 months ago," James continued. "She was sick by then. She knew time was short." Marcus's throat closed. "She told me it was just the flu." James nodded. "She didn't want you to be afraid. She didn't want her illness to be the thing you remembered most." Marcus clenched his fists. "So where did the money come from?" James took a slow breath. "From her." "That's not possible," Marcus said quickly. "She cleaned offices. She barely slept." "That's exactly why it is possible," James replied. "For years, she paid into a life insurance policy. Small amounts. Money she could have spent on herself. Money she didn't." Marcus felt his eyes burn. "She never bought new clothes. She chose you instead," James said gently. "When she passed, the policy paid out. She set it up in your name with protections, a trust, enough to make sure you and your sister would never be afraid of the future the way she was." The room felt too small, too full. "She knew I'd mess it up," Marcus whispered. "That's why she didn't tell me." James smiled sadly. "She trusted you more than you realize. She just didn't want the weight of it on your shoulders while she was still here." Marcus pressed his face into his hands, the tears finally spilling free. Images flooded his mind, his mother skipping meals, smiling through exhaustion, brushing his hair with hands that shook. "She loved you fiercely," James said. "This wasn't luck. It was sacrifice." Marcus lifted his head, breathing hard. For the first time since walking into the bank, the money didn't feel unreal. It felt earned, and somewhere deep inside, something settled, not relief, not joy, but a quiet understanding. His mother had never been powerless. She had been preparing him all along. When Marcus returned to the lobby, it felt smaller than before. Not because the room had changed, but because the people in it had. The marble floors still gleamed, the chandeliers still glittered, but the air was different, heavy, uneasy. Stripped of its earlier confidence, conversations that had once flowed freely were now frozen mid-thought. Heads turned as Marcus stepped out beside James, but the stares had lost their sharpness. No one laughed. No one whispered. Even the sound of footsteps seemed too loud, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Richard Blackwell stood near his desk, stiff and pale, his posture rigid in a way Marcus hadn't seen before. The man who had filled the room with his voice now looked uncertain, as though he wasn't sure where to place his hands or his eyes. His confident smile was gone, replaced by something tight and strained. James stopped near the center of the lobby. He didn't raise his voice, but he didn't need to. "There will be no further questions," he said calmly. "The account is legitimate, fully verified. The trust is in order." No one challenged him. The woman in the pearl necklace who had laughed earlier stared at the floor, her face flushed. The man in the 3-piece suit shifted uncomfortably, suddenly fascinated by the veins in the marble. A few people glanced at Marcus, then quickly looked away, as if embarrassed to be seen looking at him at all. Marcus felt it then, the shift. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't fear. It was shame. Richard cleared his throat. "This has been a misunderstanding," he said, forcing the words out. "I may have spoken out of turn." The silence that followed was brutal. And no one nodded. No one agreed. The authority that once wrapped around him like armor now hung loose, ineffective. Marcus realized that Richard wasn't being judged for his mistake. He was being judged for who he'd shown himself to be. James placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Marcus will be escorted home today," he said. "Arrangements will be made immediately." A security guard stepped forward, not to block Marcus, but to open a path. The same guards who had once been called to remove him now stood aside, eyes lowered. As Marcus walked through the lobby, he felt dozens of eyes on his back. Not mocking, not curious, quiet. At the doors, he paused. For a brief moment, he turned back. Richard Blackwell wouldn't meet his gaze. Marcus didn't feel victory. He didn't feel anger. What he felt was something steadier, something new. He had walked in invisible. He was walking out undeniable. And behind him, in that room of wealth and judgment, the silence spoke louder than any laughter ever had. Marcus stepped out into the sunlight. And for the first time that day, it didn't feel like something he had to endure. The city noise rushed back in horns, footsteps, distant sirens, but it no longer pressed down on him the way it had that morning. James walked beside him, calm and steady, as if this were just another Tuesday and not the moment Marcus's life had quietly split in two. A black car waited at the curb. The driver opened the door without a word, his movements respectful, careful. Marcus hesitated before getting in, glancing back at the glass towers that reflected the sky like nothing inside them could ever break. That place had taken his fear and tried to turn it into entertainment. It had failed. Inside the car, the leather seats were soft, the air cool. James handed him a folder. "Everything you need is in here," he said gently. "Housing arrangements, school enrollment, medical coverage for your sister, a guardian process that protects you until you're older. No one will touch what your mother left you without oversight." Marcus nodded, gripping the folder like it might disappear if he loosened his fingers. "She planned all this," he said quietly. "Even when we had nothing." James smiled, but his eyes were wet. "She gave you something far more valuable than money," he said. "She gave you time, safety, a future she knew she wouldn't be part of but one she refused to leave unfinished." As the car pulled away, Marcus pressed his forehead lightly against the window. He thought of his mother coming home late at night, exhausted, shoes worn thin, hands cracked from chemicals and cold water. He thought of the way she smiled, anyway, of how she always said, "Hold your head up, Marcus. No one gets to decide your worth." Money hadn't taught him that. At their apartment building, James walked him inside. The eviction notice was still taped crookedly to the door, fluttering slightly in the stale hallway air. James removed it and folded it once before slipping it into his pocket, like something already obsolete. "Someone will come today," James said, "to help you pack. You and your sister won't be staying here." Marcus nodded again. He unlocked the door and stepped into the dim room that smelled of dust and old meals. Emma looked up from the floor, where she was coloring with a stubby crayon. "Did you fix it?" she asked. Marcus knelt and pulled her into his arms. She felt small, fragile, real. "Yes," he said, his voice steady. "Mom fixed it." That night, as the sun set beyond the city, Marcus lay awake thinking not about the millions he couldn't touch, but about what he already had. A roof that would hold, food that would come, a sister who would sleep without fear, and a mother who had turned sacrifice into legacy. Money could buy comfort, it could buy protection, but dignity, his mother had paid for that with her life, and she had left it to him, intact.